Hello, and welcome to a new chapter. Chapter 8, we're going to be looking at how atoms come together to form chemical bonds and to form molecules. And so that's the focus of this chapter. This chapter, we're largely going to talk about molecular compounds. But just as a brief review of the types of compounds that we can have, we've talked about this a little bit already in the class, but this is a good introduction to the chapter and why we're thinking about this. So chapter 7 was all thinking about individual atoms. Right, so we had individual atoms and linking about what's happening with electrons inside those atoms, and now we're moving into thinking about how do atoms combine. And there are a few different ways that atoms can combine. The primary focus of this chapter is going to be atoms combining to form molecules, where we have a distinct set of atoms that combine. And so in our chart over here, that's here the type of bonding that's called covalent bonding. And this is where the different atoms that come together to form a molecule share electrons. So the electrons are sort of in between the two atoms and hold them together into molecules. And so that's the electron distribution here. Now there are other types of molecules, other types of compounds that we can form. Another main type of compound that we've talked about quite a bit is our ionic compounds. And these involve mostly metals and nonmetals. And here the electrons are transferred. And so you have an electron and ions are formed. So something like where you have Na plus and Cl minus. An electron went from sodium to chlorine to make those ions. And that makes a different sort of compound. All right, these are ionic compounds. These form crystalline structures rather than individual molecules. And so we see that depicted in this picture right here. One final type of bonding that we haven't talked about yet, but is another type, and we are not really going to talk about it much in this chapter at all, but just want to bring it up as the final major type of chemical bonding, is what's called metallic bonding. And this happens within metals when we have a solid piece of metal like copper or iron or something like that. And here the electrons are delocalized, meaning the electrons are spread out across the whole solid. So rather than being shared between atoms or transferred from one atom to another, they are delocalized and spread out across the whole crystal structure of the metal. And again, just to bring this up as a type of bonding. We're not going to focus on this a lot. You're not going to be asked questions about this a lot, but just want to bring it up. And if you're interested, you can find out more about this. As we get started with this chapter, just want to emphasize that we are going to primarily be talking about this first box here. So chapter 8 is almost entirely about covalent bonds. We'll mention ionic bonding a little bit, and metallic bonding not really at all. And so chapter 8 is about learning how can we understand how atoms come together to form molecules. Now that we understand what's happening with their electrons and orbitals and things like that. And as we move into chapter 9, just as a little preview, we're going to think about not just about how these atoms come together, but what sort of shapes do they make and what's their geometry. So in the next video, we're going to jump into how do we think about bonding in atoms.